Welcome to Rocco's Modern Life. Take it back. That's Kickin' It. Welcome to Kickin' It. It's Grant Mahoney, Jeff Woody. We're here after the Iowa State Cyclones beat the Oklahoma Sooners. Not as badly as the game would indicate as what happened, but 34-27, Iowa State wins. We are brought to you by Kelder Manufacturing. It is officially harvest season, Grant. And if you need if mechanical problems happen, you don't quite have the equipment ready, which hopefully you do. But if you're looking to either after this harvest season, before this harvest season, replace some of your equipment, you need something manufactured, you need something tweaked, got a place for you. You know where that place is?
Kelderman Manufacturing.
I think that's the actual, that's the song. So if they don't have an actual slogan, I think they just need to record that. Aiden, you want to send that to them?
I can do better.
Got it. Okay. Anyway, we're in the Wild Rose Casino and Resort Studios. As per the usual, we got NBA Jam going on in the corner. So if you're on the YouTube channel or if you're on the YouTube feed and you're watching this and I just keep peering over to my right, it's because I'm watching James Worthy dunk on somebody. Probably. I don't know. Something's happening with NBA Jam that's impressive. But anyway.
Mark Price for three.
Mark Price, that's a deep pull. I always loved playing with the Golden State Warriors because you could be Chris Mullin and just because he's the best 3-point. Like there's like a few guys that have maxed out 3-point shooters. Him and Reggie Miller were the tall ones. And so I liked being able to play with a tall 3-point shooter. So I always played with Golden State. So you could just huck threes from anywhere.
No, my team was always the Spurs because you had David Robinson and Tim Duncan. So like you couldn't, you'd stuff everyone and then you'd dunk on everyone. Like
it's easy.
It's too easy.
It's easy.
Yeah.
Anyway, points are fun, Grant. Points are fun.
It's crazy what happens when Coach Campbell listens to the podcast and just lets Fieldhouse cook, you know?
We are officially the catalysts of change. You're welcome, America. We did that for you. That is 100% the reason why they changed. No, I think it is interesting because the game, like I said, the game wasn't as close as what the scoreboard would indicate at the very end, and it was a little tense towards the end. But Oklahoma State had a few flash plays, and the defense didn't play awesome. There were a few times where on that last drive, I think Miles Purchase has just been gassed because he was trailing Brennan Presley the entire time. Basically, the entire second half, he was just matched with Brennan Presley the whole way.
And Presley's quick.
And he just got a little bit gassed. And then they switched him to a tight end, got a little bit off in a route. But other than that, the defense played pretty solid. You good?
Wrong pipe.
No, for those that aren't watching, he's referring to windpipe, not an actual pipe. I think that is it's illegal in
Drink
this
out of my
state.
Stanley went down the wrong pipe.
Use the wrong pipe.
I'm good.
Anyway, so Oklahoma State they had a few flash plays, but I think the story obviously here is that the offense looked better. We'll get into the offense in a second, but first things first, most important, special teams PLY.
Yeah, Chase Contreras dropped his big old nutsack on the Big 12 this week and won Player of the Week, Big 12 Special Teams Player of the Week. Hell of a bounce back, man. Going 0 for 2 and then his first field goal attempt coming back after that.
52?
51.
51.
And just
into the wind.
Smooched the upright, but in nonetheless. Great execution. The ball itself, the trajectory was fine, but the rotation wasn't quite perfect.
A little under it?
He wrapped his foot a little bit.
So it was a little wobbly.
Yeah, so a little wobbly, and you could see that's why I was kind of trailing towards if he's kicking it, the left upright, because he hooked his foot just a smidge, and that's what caused it from, it's going to be an end over end. Like you had a little bit of that X going on. But when it goes in, it doesn't matter.
Well, and I think the cool thing, so that kick, the operation was really good.
It was.
Snap, hold, kick, everything was on time. It was in rhythm. Hit Perkins right where he needed to. And the second one I thought was a more impressive kick because the snap it was a great hold. And the snap was a little bit off, but still got it down. Nails a 47-yarder to make the game a 2-score game.
Yeah, and I don't know Contreras personally, but I'm really proud of him, just how he's bounced back. Because right now, he is consistent, and I'm not trying to shit on the long snapper. We've got a long snapping problem where he's not
short snapping problem.
Short.
Long snap's good.
The long snapper,
yeah.
But the short snapping.
Short snapping.
On field goals. Yeah, we've got a short snapping field goal problem where I think it's Knobloch, is just, he's inconsistent, which is, it's hard to be reliable. It's hard to, as a kicker, it'd be hard to trust. I was thankful that I had Dakota Zimmerman, who was
Gray Mountain.
Yeah, the dude was nails every time. He always had just awesome snaps. And Knobloch's been fine. He's done well, but there's
a couple off.
He's had inconsistencies, and it's hard to be 100% confident, when you're Perkins and when you're Contreras. knowing that the execution is going to be there every single time. But Contreras has bounced back. Like you said, the second field goal, 46-yarder was slightly high, but Perkins got it down, hit his spot, and kick went through perfectly.
And the other thing, just general special teams, the way that they executed was really solid. And there was some times when Jalen Knoll, in the past, you let that at the very end of the game when it was kind of, he fair caught it and then ran into the trees to go make an actual catch, throws his hand up for a fair catch, goes and actually receive the ball. If he doesn't make that, I think Iowa State gets the ball, maybe the plus 48. If he doesn't make that catch, that ball probably bounces and rolls for 10 or 15 yards because that thing was coming down hard. And otherwise, like general special teams, it was a solid effort and nothing really went. It was unremarkably well executed. Even some of the shanks, air quotes shanks, by Tyler Perkins, I think he was kicking with the wind. I think he got a little ambitious trying to keep the nose up a little bit, tried to get it up in the wind, just got under a little bit, still got a roll. And I think one of his quote shank ended up landing and rolling and still netting 54. Not bad for a shank. So total yards number, what do you think we're at? What's the plus?
I would say that the only bad thing we had is the kickoff went out of bounds.
That was supposed to be a squib. Yes? Do you think he approached it like it was a squib? Because it was that situation at the very end of the game that was...
Yeah, I can see that.
I think kicking off with 2.5 minutes left or 4 minutes left, something like that. The last kickoff of the game, it looks like that was intended to be a squib and he just pulled it.
Personally, I don't understand squibs because they are just a piss rocket that's getting into the returner's hands fast.
But you might get it to a fat guy. Like that's the thing that I think.
What I would prefer, what I would do if I were Coach Langs, I would if you don't want the returner to get it, you kick that thing as high as you can because that gives your return team time to get down there, and two, if you want a fat guy to catch it, kick it to a fat guy, and if he doesn't catch it, if the returner wants to run up and get it, okay, run up and get it, but our guys are gonna be right there to tackle him. That's my stance on squib kicks.
What if next week they actually do that? That's the litmus test to see if the coaching staff is paying attention and they're listening to Kickin' It, and they kick a real high blooper in a situation where they're trying to run the clock out. That's the litmus test.
There was a couple of years ago too where Iowa State did it and we recovered it. I can't remember. Was it 2020? I feel like everything went for us in 2020. So I'm gonna say 2020, where whoever the kicker was at the time, we just kept. Iowa State kept just kind of dropping it right behind the up back, but right in front of the return man. And Iowa State got the ball. I want to say in the bowl game. There was one game where we got it. It wasn't intentional, but we got it. And when you're not expecting that, weird things can happen.
Hidden yardage, what do you think?
Okay, so total yardage, Iowa State had 422 and Oklahoma State had 409, which we'll talk about. We'll put an asterisk next to 409.
Giddy up.
I would say that I think Iowa State was positive.
Now, to be fair, Iowa State did have a kneel down at the end of the game. You got to remove that one.
Okay.
Because there was the interception by Tampa, kneel down, remove that off the schedule, and they got the ball in the 39. So let's take that off. So total yardage, Iowa State plus or minus what?
I really don't like this game, Jeff.
I don't care.
You know what? I've been the opponent. I've thought the opponent has had more hidden yardage every game. I think Iowa State's got more hidden yardage this game. I'm going to say Iowa State had 47 yards of hidden yardage.
Aiden?
Let's go 65, Iowa State.
Iowa State plus 36.
Ooh, I was close.
If you were to include, they got the ball in their own 39 on that kneel down. If you were to include the kneel down, they're like plus 80-ish, whatever that 36 plus 39, so 75, whatever it is. So it was more or less a push. There wasn't a lot of field position difference that really happened all that much. There was a lot of touchbacks for the majority of it. But otherwise, yeah, a pretty well-played special teams game. Kicking got back on, which is really good going into the remainder of the Big 12 season, or the remainder of the season, because you're 1/3 of the season is done. You're 4 games in. You've got 8 games left, guaranteed. So you're 1/3 of the season done, and your kicker has regained his confidence. Which, if you look at the rest of the conference, Texas has looked really good. Like, as much as it pains me to say, Texas is clear-cut the best team in the conference right now. But outside of Texas, is there really any team that you look at and you go, man, there's no way Iowa State can pull that one off? Kansas State gets beat by Mizzou. Kansas.
It gets beat by Mizzou in like a 63-yard bomb. That was awesome.
Andrew Mevis' little brother. Baby Mevis. But Kansas State's looked fine. But you stop. I mean that UCF
Kansas's offense has looked good, but their defense has
looked trash.
Yeah, they've gotten Swiss cheese.
And so you have, I mean, Texas Tech. I don't know why people thought Texas Tech was going to be good. Baylor's looked way worse than they normally have. TCU's been really hit or miss.
UCF has looked fine, but
they're out there starting quarterback, so they played a backup against Kansas State. And they played respectable. So UCF seems decent. Cincinnati, Emory Jones at quarterback he's played. I'll just call it uninspired. A lot of it is trying to either do too much or just misreading everything. I've watched a couple games. I watched the Oklahoma game. And there's not really, I mean, so you look through the rest of the season, there's not really anyone outside of Texas that you go, man, they're good. And even Texas, who knows? Like they beat Alabama, but then they sleptwalked through the first half of Wyoming.
And I think Alabama's down this year too.
And then Texas beat the bejesus out of Baylor. But we'll see what they're going to be come Oklahoma. So the rest of this season with Contreras being confident and comfortable and the special teams operating, the margins that Iowa State is talking about, they don't win the game on Saturday if the, quote, margins were bad. They won special teams, top to bottom. It's been sort of pushish. They won the turnover margin 2-0, and they didn't, they executed really well at quarterback. They didn't run the ball, but they did the rest of the things right in a way that set them up for success. And having a kicker that is confident going into the rest of that season is a huge difference maker for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and it's, there's a lot of either confidence or just deflating that goes into, say Iowa State gets the ball in the 20, they drive down to the other 20, and you miss a field goal. There's nothing more deflating and demoralizing for the team than, we were just out on the field for, 10 minutes driving the ball and then you miss the kick. Like that's one that, it sucks for the kicker. But two, it's like the offense is just, pissed off because you just drove that entire way. So having a reliable kicker and having Contreras on, his A game is like just such a confidence booster for the entire team. And like you've mentioned, in order for Iowa State to win, they got to win in the margins. And if Contreras keeps this up, it's going to be huge. And that was the difference last year. In a lot of games where Iowa State lost, we missed kicks and we lose by not much. But not just that, it's also a confidence booster to the team when you miss a kick. So
and trusting that when you get into the red zone, or if you're making 2 50-yarders at home and a 48-yarder pretty quickly after that, if you get to near the 30, then you can more or less count on points. And then Rocco doesn't have to feel like he's got to force something in, or you don't have to go for it on 4th and 6. You can just, hey, if it's not there, throw it in the third row of the stands. Let's live to play another game, or live to play another down. Trot the kicker out there. Yeah,
and I'm really impressed with Contreras. He's got a very fluid motion, very easily repeatable motion. When I was out there, I was kind of helter-skelter and just, every time I saw a ball, I just thought, I'm going to murder this thing. And I went out my freshman year, I was 145 pounds. So the way I was able to generate a 57-yard field goal was, the leg speed, whereas Contreras has a very fluid, smooth approach and leg swing, one that you'd see from Iowa kickers, that Iowa's always had really good kickers. But their kickers they make it look so effortless. And that's how Contreras is. He's very robotic, which is good to be a kicker. But he's very smooth. He's very smooth in his approach and his swing through and his mechanics, I should say. So
that kind of leads, the special teams is good. Tyler Perkins, again, great.
Dog.
Ray guy. So moving on from the special teams to kind of the story of the game was the fact that the offense worked. The thing that I really liked about the offense, so a couple things. Matt Campbell after the game, and now take this for what it's worth. Any time a coach is at a podium, like I think Williams has said, is like they're more or less. It's not the truth, but it's like a direction towards the truth, like ish. But the thing that he was saying after the game is that he was calling or styling the game in a way that was playing not to lose as opposed to playing to win. Now, what that meant is that I think the goal of having those 3 tight ends is to play a run-first style, which if you can execute run-first style, you suck the air out of the ball, you're able to keep your team on the field, your defense then gets to rest, gets to be more aggressive. You can potentially, if you get a 7 or 10-point lead, then you can just strangle the game. And that means that your quarterback is probably not throwing a ball into contested situations. You're probably not doing a lot of RPOs because an RPO has The read on the run could be a potential screw up and fumble. The read on the throw could be, if it's read wrong, that's a pick six. There is some risk that goes into running stuff like RPOs, throwing the ball into coverage, and admitting that after the game and saying, we just freed it up. Like, actually, we're able to be aggressive. I think Rocco and the way the offense executed between Jalen Noel and Daniel Jackson and Dimitri Stanley played really well. The tight ends in the passing game, Easton Dean's best game is a Cyclone.
Dogs.
And you have all those guys that played really well. It allowed the offense to be more of what it needed to be. And this is a thing. I like building stuff. My dad was a construction worker and did flooring for forever. And so I grew up helping him build stuff. And one of the things that he told me is that the project will become what it wants to be as you're building it, where you might think that this table needs to be, or this chair needs to be 24 inches wide. Well, when you actually get it to be cut, maybe the grain of the wood is a little bit different if it's 25 and a quarter or something like that. And so as you go through the process, you're not so stubborn that you're just adhering to the plan. You're allowing the process to teach you something as you're going. And it feels like this was a big change between last week and this week, is allowing the team to influence what they wanted to do on the field.
Yeah, and you can't not run the ball, so we have to continue to run the ball. But I also felt like, I feel like, Campbell and Shieldhouse and whoever else is seeing that running is not our strength. We our offense, Iowa State's offensive line is they're not run blocking very well. And, we kind of talked about this, I think, offline, where I felt like, we can't run between the tackles. We're struggling to run between the tackles, but we still have dynamic ball carriers. And so somehow get the ball into the running back's hands on the outside. Sama's fast, Norton's fast, or not Norton, Sanders. Oh, I think Norton. I think he's more injured than we think.
That didn't look like a
that wasn't a stinger. I think he broke his collarbone. I think is what happened.
I don't know what happened. Anyway, we're not
or
doctors.
separated his shoulder. You're right. But I did say Holiday Inn Express. No. But I think the running backs, you can't not run the ball. But I think Iowa State needs to figure out how they can run the ball and be effective. And I think, being a kicker that I am and playing running back in 7th grade, getting the ball on the outside with our fast guys is how Iowa State's going to have to run the ball.
So here's what I saw when we were actually, when just watching the game. So I watched it in person and watched it again on replay. In the first, there's two things that can be true at one time. One, run blocking is still pretty suspect. There's a lot of times, whether there's a collision that's in the wrong spot, or, everyone kind of recalls, James Neal had a rough game. Not great. Also,
Simmons did not play.
Between the Ohio game, I had to go back. It's a fun little story about this. So watching the Ohio game, so for Channel 5 at 10:30 every Saturday, I do the Cyhawk game day, and I get it's a really fun segment that I get to do, which they have a touchscreen TV, get to put a play up there. I get to doodle on the entire thing and say, this is what they're doing and whatever. And so I was trying to figure out, because the story coming out of that game was the fact that Iowa State couldn't run the ball. And so I had to go back and watch every single running play that Iowa State had to see if there was a good camera angle that you could put on the screen. And I texted you guys because we have kind of a chat to plan out what we want to go over. And I told you guys, I think it was maybe, Friday, that I was like, I would be shocked if Daryl Simmons plays on Saturday with as poorly as he was, as poorly as he executed. This doesn't mean that he's not going to play for the rest of the season, but after the performance against Ohio, we didn't see him. Now, maybe he's hurt. Maybe that's the reason why, but I would guess it's a performance-based thing. So they got a freshman, is it Brennan Black?
Brennan Black, yeah.
So the freshman comes in, does pretty well for a freshman, but still the run game isn't great. So thing number one that can be true is the running game still needs to improve. The second thing is the fact that Iowa State finally broke their own tendencies, which forced Oklahoma to change. So by the Oklahoma State, which forced Oklahoma State to change by the second half. What happened was, in the first half of the game, anytime Iowa State ran a multiple tight end set, or really in a run down, if it's first down and they tried to run the ball, or it's multiple tight ends, or they motion somebody in the things that are conventionally going to be, Iowa State runs the ball out of this look. Oklahoma State runs like a poor man's version of Iowa State's defense. That's a 3-3-5 or like a 3-2-6 or something like that. And their safety, the middle safety, I think is number 5. He's like 6'4", like 220. Just plays like a linebacker.
Caden Daniels, yeah.
And his job is the way they have him filling is they have him filling like a B or a C gap. He is a trigger player. If you see run, you are to insert in the middle of that offensive line and mess something up. You have a gap. I think he has a gap responsibility. If he doesn't have a gap responsibility, he's sort of just a float player, but his goal is to mess something up. Well, that guy is playing at 8 or 9 yards. He's not in your count. So what I mean by your count is the offensive line, the center, is going to point at and say, Mike is 41. And then everybody sets their blocking assignment off of that. And then it's, the guard has the guy one to the left of that Mike or ID or whatever. And the backside tackle has 2 pass to the other side. So everything's set off of that. And that guy's not in your count. So even if you're including the down linemen, the linebackers, maybe some overhang players, they're the ones that are overhang players, meaning the people that are outside the tackles or outside the tight ends. Maybe you include all those people in your count, but you don't include that guy. And if you're not including that guy, he triggers hard as a run because you've given every indication on film that is a run play. In the first half, that happened. Even if on plays that were blocked well, that guy is a free player. He's an unaccounted for blocker. He's an unaccounted for tackler. So he was fitting. Anytime there was a run, he was fitting hard downhill. Is it any surprise that the most successful offensive plays that Iowa State had were play action across the middle? He's a middle safety. He's playing at 9 or 10 yards, playing straight downhill. If he sees any type of run action, the first big play to Jalen Knoll, the touchdown to Daniel Jackson, touchdown to Jalen Knoll, it's a play that is right down the middle because any run action out of a multiple tight end set was, in the past, guaranteed run play. By the time they got burned 6, 7, 8 times, Oklahoma State had to then back their safeties back and also, not just in alignment, but also they had to remove that immediate trigger. At that point, Eli Sanders rips off a 10-yard run or a 6-yard run or a 4-yard run, or they're able to give a little shovel pass out to Daniel Jackson, and Daniel Jackson runs around the corner and gets a 7 or 8 yards. And that starts to open up because the tendency that Iowa State had when multiple tight ends or motioning somebody in was run downhill. By breaking those tendencies, it forced Oklahoma State to respect the rest of the game. That being said, I am curious going into Oklahoma now, that's on film, will it be easier to run the ball in quarter one because you did break tendencies? You now aren't guaranteed that if I'm an offense and I come out down tight end on the left, off tight end on the right, running back in the pistol, and I turn my back as a quarterback looking like I'm going to hand it off, I can't guarantee that that's going to be a run play because Iowa State's most successful plays and had a ton of explosives on play action and multiple tight end sets that were run plays. So, one, the run game still it has some work to be done. The blocking execution from the tight ends and the offensive line is not good. It's not good enough yet. But schematically, by letting Rocco cook, letting him actually throw play action, letting him throw RPOs, letting him actually move and command the offense, it forces the triggering alley safeties or run players from that second level, the third level, they have to back out. So yeah, I'm interested to see what Oklahoma does because they might have to start playing back, which means that the running game should have a little bit more room to breathe. Again, you still have to execute it, but it should have a little bit more room to breathe this week.
That's good. I mean, I didn't realize that, but that does make sense that, it's crazy when Iowa State's got coaches that make adjustments. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? But I would say that, the next element I would like to see Iowa State progress to is on an RPO to make it an RPO, not just an R. Just pull the ball if you need to. Pull the ball, dump it off to our 3 tight ends. That's me backyard football.
That actually did happen. And so, yeah, Daniel Jackson's touchdown, I think, was a called pass. The one that Easton Dean caught that got them into a position where Eli Sanders could score, it was like a 12 or 13-yard dump off. That was an RPO. There was a lot of, Williams and Bloom, they played the air raid siren, which is the most horrible sound that I've ever heard. Chris, please never play that sound again. Awful. It scared my dogs. Like I was listening to it just on my phone in the kitchen, and it scared my dogs. Like they thought that it was it was just terrible sound. Anyway, they joke about it's the air raid. Kind of, sort of, but one of the things that they were doing. So in the air raid, you're substituting passes for runs. That's the whole point. Is that 2nd and 3 is 2nd and 3. I don't care how you get there, whether it's a pass play, whether it's a run play, whether it's a quarterback sneak. It doesn't give a shit. Just I got to get to 2nd and 3. And by the time the third quarter happened and Iowa State was playing, they're still playing 12 personnel, meaning they have a running back and 2 tight ends. they'd have, say, Easton Dean, who's the best downhand tight end that Iowa State has by a good margin. And Steve O'Klotz is like blocking with one arm.
He's back. He's back.
He's got.
Iowa State made sure that they first pass play gave to him. Steve-O's alive. Here he is.
But I mean, when you watch him block, like he's not using. I think it's his left arm. Like he's not using his left arm. Like that, he's got some type of neck or shoulder going on. Normally, he's your best blocker. So Easton Dean is your best blocker, and I would say, arguably, your only good blocker at this point at that position. But the rest of them, especially Bramer. What's his name? 84, Burkle. You've got guys that can operate in space. Bramer's your best, but you've got 12 personnel, downhand with Easton Dean. But you've got, say, there was a couple times where they'd run trips to one side, meaning there's 3 wide receivers. And because of the play actions, because of the fact that they'd gotten beaten deep and Oklahoma State was actually having to play a deeper look, they're playing match. They're number one, or on the number one receiver starting from the sideline in. Number one receiver was getting kind of pressed by the corner. The number 2 was playing, the guy covering number 2 was way off, 12, 15 yards deep. The guy playing number 3 is playing at like 10 or 12 yards, 8 or 10, and they have an overhang player like Iowa State does. It's sort of their outside linebacker. And they ran several. It was 4 or 5 of the completions were just RPOs to that side because the guys covering 2 and 3 are playing at 12 yards. Just run 5 yards and turn around. And if there's a guy who drops, then we're going to run right at him. If that guy comes forward, I'm going to throw it, and that's where you get to be 2nd and 3. It doesn't really matter. You're just throwing it to a guy who's run and turn around. So the fact that Iowa State's running game didn't really work, they still had options to pull Oklahoma State out of what they wanted to do to be able to execute what their offense needed to be. So yeah, it wasn't great offensive, like running the ball wise, but it got the job done to the point where Oklahoma will now for sure have to change their game plan. I'm just curious of what that game plan is going to be.
Well, I'm glad too that Iowa State, for the first 3 games, we just saw them dinking and dunking and not really trying anything past 8 yards. And then, Rocco's out there cooking, man. He's out there cooking, just launching it deep. I'm proud of Jalen Knoll too. The dude was sick, versus Ohio, couldn't play. Sometimes you just need a good puke and rally. That's what he did. He just, got it out, and the dude rallied. I mean, he had a. Tell me I'm wrong.
Is interesting contextual use of that term.
It works.
It's good enough.
It works.
It's good
enough. But he had a great game. I mean, maybe his best game in a Cyclone uniform.
And Daniel Jackson's for sure his best.
I'm a big Daniel Jackson fan, man. I mean, he has been dinged up his entire career. He finally looks healthy. He's out there eating, man. Yeah. Dog.
He was 6 targets, 6 receptions, 2 touchdowns.
Dog.
Boom. So that is the thing that I'm interested going in, and we're going to get into this a lot more on Fart. And I think Aiden, we already recorded this, so go listen to Fart. We would have already talked about it. We totally had done that in the past. But anyway, we're going to switch gears to actually introduce. We do have a guest this week,
and very knowledgeable guest.
Very knowledgeable. Good dude, sharp. Younger than I expected him to be.
Great insight, yeah.
So Parker Thune, he covers Oklahoma for Rivals. So the Goldfinch Athletics interview segment of the week is going to be Parker Thune with Rivals. So Goldfinch Athletics, if you're interested, go to goldfinchathletics.com. We are having a Partner Week special starting October 2nd. And if you want to come into any one of our locations, it is going to be free. Everything's done with a buddy. You're going to meet people. Everything is adaptable to whatever your level is. So goldfinchathletics.com and get started. But anyway, so we're going to kick it over to Parker Thune.
Now we welcome in Parker Thune from Rivals for Oklahoma. Parker, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course, fellas. Glad to be here.
We, as our listeners know, Iowa State coming off a hot win over hot garbage Oklahoma State. We are now going down to, I'm trying to think, Norman.
Memorial Stadium.
Yeah, Memorial Stadium, yeah. And in Norman, Oklahoma to face on the Sooners. Parker, thanks again for joining us. Yeah, right off the bat, what can you tell us about the Sooners?
Well, this is obviously a program that experienced a down year for the first time in a long time in 2022. 6-7, it was their first losing season since 1998, which preceded Bob Stoops' arrival. So it's been a minute since the Sooners struggled the way that they did in 2022. Really difficult to tell how much they've turned the page and how much growth and improvement there has been. But for anybody that's watched Oklahoma through 4 games this season, it's very clear there's been some improvement. Dylan Gabriel at the quarterback position. He's the trigger man in Jeff Lebby's offense, and he's been strong and he's been solid throughout his career as a Sooner. Low risk type of quarterback, going to play pretty conservatively, doesn't take a ton of shots, doesn't put the ball in harm's way a whole heck of a lot. The big question mark right now for Oklahoma is the running game from an offensive standpoint. It's kind of bizarre how they've rotated their backs through the first 4 weeks of the season, and we can dive into that a bit more later. But I think what has Sooner fans excited right now is that this defense is playing better than it has in a long, long time for the Crimson and Cream. And we were talking right before we went on the air, what these fans are accustomed to. Well, if you think back to the last couple of defensive coordinators Oklahoma has had, Mike Stoops and Alex Grinch weren't outstanding at their jobs.
Well, it's very nice of you to say it that way.
So obviously you bring in Brent Venables in December of 2021 with the idea that he is going to rejuvenate your program from an overall standpoint, sure, but there's no more qualified, no more revered defensive mind in college football than Brent Venables. He was overqualified to be a head coach, and I think everybody was just kind of surprised that it took him that long to take a gig. But you bring in a defensive-minded guy like that, you expect that there is going to be pretty immediate improvement. 2022 was a tough year for many reasons. The hand that Venables was dealt in terms of defensive talent was not tremendous. And so 2023 is, I think, where you've really started to see some of those improvements take root. And currently, as we sit here recording this podcast, through 4 games, Oklahoma's got the second best scoring defense in the nation. Now it's come against Arkansas State, SMU, Tulsa, and Cincinnati. So maybe not the best gauge on how elite this defense truly is, but from what Sooner fans have seen of their defense thus far in 2023, no doubt you have to be impressed and you have to be pleased.
So when you're talking about the defense from last year to this year, there's obviously an execution thing. It doesn't matter how many people you swap out, but what is the roster turnover from last year to this year? Because, I mean, despite the fact that it was still a fairly close game last year, as I recall, at least for the majority of the game, between Iowa State and Oklahoma, was there a big personnel change from last year, or is it just like general execution that's gotten better?
Well, they have, I mean, from a personnel standpoint, they have overhauled. They made several big additions via the transfer portal, nabbed a couple of 5-star signees that have already made a tremendous impact for this defense. Safety Peyton Bowen, who I believe closed the cycle as the number 25 overall player in the country, and then edge rusher PJ Adibawara. His very first offer came from Iowa State. Really good
Kansas
eval
City,
by
right?
that staff.
Kid from Kansas City?
Yep, that's right. North Kansas City High. Absolute freak show.
You know what? Oklahoma, actually, they stole a commit from Iowa State, too.
R. Mason Thomas.
You
R.
dog.
Mason Thomas. There you go. And
Dirty rascal.
yeah, he's actually been banged up. He's only appeared in 1 game thus far. He
Hey, ball don't lie.
should return. The big question right now for Oklahoma as they head into this matchup with Iowa State is who they want to bring back, because they have several guys who are banged up, but probably capable of playing this weekend. The big question is, okay, how many of these guys do you play at less than 100%, and how many of them do you keep on the shelf knowing that the biggest game of your season is the following weekend down in the Cotton Bowl against Texas?
Is there, like, because you're a reporter, you're in the facility kind of as like a neutral observer. You're sort of like an alien walking through a new planet, being like, what are you all doing? What are you all feeling? Just reporting back to home base what that is. Is there a sense that this week is in the way of Red River? No.
I think here's the deal, guys. In most cases, yes, that would be the thought. But what I think most everyone within the building at Oklahoma, and on a broader scale, the fan base as a whole, they understand 2 things. One is that regardless of how these 2 teams have matched up on paper in recent years, Iowa State has always given them a challenge, whether that has been in Ames or whether that has been in Norman. So I think there came a point, I would say probably back in 2021, when the Cyclones went 7-6, but still took Oklahoma down to the wire in Norman, where there was a degree of respect established for what Matt Campbell has built, and an understanding that, okay, going forward, you can never look past this team, can never look past them. And also, one thing that has been a constant for Oklahoma in recent years is they've always gotten surprised somewhere along the line when they've gotten caught looking past an opponent. I think back to the Kansas State game in 2019 where the Wildcats upset a 7-0 Oklahoma team in Manhattan. I think back to Ames in 2020, right, where the Sooners are coming off what looks like a fluky loss to Kansas State, and they're eager to get back on track. Where they go up to Ames for a night kick against Brock Purdy and the Cyclones, and the defense falls apart. Breece Hall rushes for a couple of touchdowns, and they end up with a second straight loss for the first time in it had been 4 years to that point. So you can't look past Iowa State because of how close they've played Oklahoma year in and year out, regardless of how they've matched up on paper. And also, Oklahoma fans know that historically, the second they get caught looking past somebody, they end up mailing it in and getting surprised.
And I kind of wanted to talk to you about, I guess, kind of a two-part question. We had talked about how last year Oklahoma had a down year, and this year, obviously, they're 4-0 and they're ranked. Is this year, is it so much that they are improved and they're better, or is it they haven't really played anybody that great so far, and they're just beating the teams that they should?
I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I do think there has been a significant degree of improvement, especially defensively, but also it's tough to truly gauge where this team's at because Cincinnati was really the first opponent that they've played all season that could give them, and SMU was able to hang with them for a while in that game. And SMU had some skill position talent. Their defense showed up and played pretty well that day. So I'll put it to you this way, though. Of the 4 opponents Oklahoma has played thus far, there has not been a single team that has stood opposite the sideline that can match up with Oklahoma physically. From an athletic standpoint, Oklahoma has been better than all 4 opponents that they've faced. And while the 2022 Sooners had an uncanny gift for losing to opponents like that, the 2023 Sooners haven't really struggled. So, yes, there's been improvement. Yes, I said it after the Cincinnati game Saturday. That game is probably a game last year's team loses, all things considered. So there's been improvement, no doubt. There's reason to believe that this team is back to its winning ways after the chaos and the tumultuous campaign that was 2022. But taking everything with a grain of salt right now until you get into the weekly grind of Big 12 play and you get the opportunity to go up against at least a couple of programs that can match up with you physically.
And Jeff had kind of touched on this too, about the Red River shootout. Is that what it's called?
Is it a rivalry?
River Rivalry.
Can we call it a shootout?
So you can call it the Red River Rivalry, the Red River Shootout, the Red River Showdown. I think it became the Showdown in like 2014 after shootout was deemed no longer politically correct. And I think
Red
as
River
of this
Tussle?
year, in 2023, I think the official designation is the Red River Rivalry now, but it's been through a variety of monikers.
The Red River football match.
So the battle for the golden cowboy hat. Jeff had kind of touched on this. Obviously, OU and Texas is next week. We don't need to talk about Texas, but they've got Kansas this week, so upset watch maybe.
Man, Texas and Kansas. That's just super fun. Just by the way, totally super fun.
Kansas
Anyway,
is
continue.
ranked now too. But has there been have you heard any chatter within the walls? Two-part question. Have you heard any chatter within the walls about this being a trap game? Don't overlook Iowa State. One, and second part, would you take the Clones to cover 19.5?
Man, that's a great question. And honestly, I think you guys would be equally qualified to answer that. But as far as your first question, has there been any chatter about this being a trap game? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, that goes back to Iowa State's history under Matt Campbell against Oklahoma. This team has consistently, year in and year out, showed up and challenged Oklahoma. Haven't always beaten them, but they've challenged them. And I think the Sooners understand that. The guys that have been through the fire and stood opposite that Cyclone team across the sidelines understand that it's a well-coached, fundamentally sound football team that shows up believing that they can win every single week, which, I mean, it sounds like a very fundamental observation to make, but it's something that is, I think, truly special about the way that Iowa State operates, because there are plenty of teams that you would figure, okay, you'd throw Iowa State on the same category as them. But I think what's been instilled culturally at Iowa State isn't quite, I would say it's stronger than what has been instilled culturally elsewhere, where you might have a team show up and figure, okay, well, let's see if we can race out to a lead in the first quarter, but 15 minutes pass and we're behind, then that's probably all she wrote. But
It wasn't a belief thing necessarily, but how many times did you play in Norman? Twice? I think the collective score, I think I played in Norman twice. I think the collective score was like 110-20.
I think I only played there once.
Uh,
Great field. Great field to kick on.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Natural grass. But speaking of natural grass, I will commend y'all on this. Iowa State has the best playing surface I've ever seen, bar none.
We have gotten awards for that.
I didn't realize that.
The field turf, the field turf crew has gotten awards for that.
Do you want to look up? I don't know, but this is necessarily a thing to pull right away. How many Super Bowls have been, or how many Super Bowls have been tended by an Iowa State turf grass graduate? I think that statistic is out there somewhere. I think it's something the effect of like this will be Super Bowl at 52. I think it's something like 26 or 27 of the Super Bowls. The person in charge of the field is an Iowa State turf grass graduate. Take that one to the bank. I don't know what the exact number is. It might be way smaller than that, but I'm going to keep it at 26 until Aiden tells me otherwise.
I feel really good about my ability to judge turf grass now, because when I went up to Iowa State, first time I'd made the trip, because 2020, that was the middle of COVID, and that was the first full season I covered the team. So I got to make my first trip up to Iowa State last year for that game up in Ames. And I was just blown away by how nice that playing surface was. Man, I love natural grass. I can't stand turf. Can't stand the field turf, the AstroTurf.
Neither can Aaron Rodgers. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Too soon.
There we go.
I mean, that's the New York Cyclones you're talking about, man.
That's right.
Also, just talking about Memorial Stadium, one of the things that I remember about that is when people always ask, like, what was the hardest stadium to play at? I always say the Bill Snyder at Kansas State, because the fans are, I would say, in the smartness ranks, they're way up there because they know when to be loud, when to be quiet. They know when, it does take you off guard because it is hard to talk about.
Can I tell you that my 4 years playing, I played Kansas State 4 years. I never played them once at home.
Because it was an Arrowhead,
and then 2 years at Kansas State.
2 years at Kansas State.
Wild, huh?
Wow, yeah. It's hard to play. Hard place to play.
Never beat them too.
We had an hour and a half lightning delay. Anyway, but Memorial Stadium's the other one because the wall is like chest high, like behind where the bench is. The wall is like chest high, and I remember there was, it's 80 something thousand, so it's really loud. The team is always good at home. I mean, it's really hard to beat Oklahoma in Norman. The home sideline, that goes up into the press box, that is like straight up. I mean, so it funnels the sound back in. But the other thing so the same thing in the smart fans level, as far as being loud when they need to be loud, is that they are exactly when that is. But it's the only time that that I can recall, because Kinnick Stadium in Iowa City is the same like height wall. I remember there was a drunk guy sitting maybe second row right behind the stands that's just chirping at one of our guys, like Ernst Brunn. And Ernst Brunn then turns around and starts chirping back with this guy. And this guy's like almost throwing up on himself drunk. And the rest of the people in the stands were like asking security to come get this drunk idiot out of the way. So I appreciate Oklahoma fans are the only ones that have ever policed their own fans from trash talking an opponent. So that is one thing that I always remember about Memorial Stadium. Also slightly less than less quality turf grass than ours. Just saying.
A little more sand, I feel like. It was sandier. One question for you, though, Parker, in regards to defense, then we can switch over to offense. Would you say that there is any sort of weakness in the Oklahoma defense? Like, do you have like a true freshman? You'd mentioned the safety, I think, but do you guys have maybe a cornerback that could be exposed, or is their run game strong? They're stronger than their passing game.
Again, it's really, really tough to gauge right now because they haven't shown any conspicuous weaknesses through 4 games, but they haven't really faced offenses with a pulse, with the exception of SMU, which is a pretty good offensive team in which they succeeded in powering down. Historically, Oklahoma's vulnerability has been against mobile quarterbacks. They've never been very good, ever since I started covering the team at least, of containing guys like that when they get outside the pocket. And they've never been very good about curtailing their impact with their legs. And so mobile quarterbacks, to me, have been the Sooners' Achilles heel defensively. The big question for a lot of fans heading into this season was how the defensive front was going to hold up against the run, specifically on the interior, because they had to replace both starters who moved on to the NFL. Well, I shouldn't say moved on to the NFL, moved on to the professional ranks after the 2022 season. So you lost 2 starters, had to replace them. They went to the transfer portal, picked up some bodies, had some guys that were younger a year ago and not quite as experienced in the system. Everybody was kind of learning Venables' defense at the same pace. They were all new to it originally because he didn't bring any transfers with him from Clemson. So everybody was kind of learning on the same pace. There were a couple younger guys that flashed at defensive tackle a year ago. So that was expected to be the vulnerability, was the interior defensive line. They've held up pretty well through 4 games. Once again, though, you had the caveat of, well, it's really, really hard to judge how good they actually are given the opponents that they've played and how good, or rather not good, those programs are about just running it down your throat.
Well, good news.
We can't run the ball.
Not Iowa State's strength here. So if you're looking at Oklahoma's offense, it sort of feels like while we're talking about the running game, you mentioned it's been sort of trying to find who's the running back is.
Yeah.
For context, Iowa State's problem generally doesn't reside in the running backs. It resides in the fact that the offensive line, it's a new offensive line coach, new offensive line scheme, and there's quite a few new starters in, and the communication is really bad.
Like they've been booty cheeks all year, man, on the run game.
That is a way to put it. But the problem isn't necessarily with the running backs, it's the offensive line. So you're getting hit in the backfield a lot. With Oklahoma, I mean, when I say struggling to run the ball, I mean outside of the Arkansas State game, just wash that because that 73-0, that ain't a game.
Yeah.
In the other 3 games, I think the high running total is like 119 yards or something like that. Even in a game when they beat Tulsa a bazillion to 10, there was still only like 120 rushing yards. They just threw it all over the yard.
Yeah.
What is the difficulty with the running game? Is it in running backs not seeing stuff? Is it in offensive linemen not staying on blocks? Is it something else? I mean, I always recall with Oklahoma, and might have just been a Lincoln Riley thing and a Bob Stoops thing, but they always had some H-back, like a Jeremiah Hall, that could just correct anything. They could fix whatever problem was going to be there, and then the running backs could just, help. Now, granted, it helps when it's like Samaje P. Ryan and guys like that, but what is the problem with Oklahoma's running game if you could quantify what it is, other than the coaches saying it's hair off here or there?
It's a combination of a lot of things. So you rewind to the Cheez-It Bowl last year against Florida State, a team that is excellent defensively, particularly up front. And the Sooners had a pair of freshman running backs that each rushed for 100 yards behind an offensive line composed of second and third stringers because they had some guys opt out in preparation for the NFL. So you didn't have a single, I think maybe you had one first-team starter on that offensive line. The rest were second and third string guys. They had 2 freshman running backs, Gavin Sawchuk and Javonte Barnes, that each rushed for 100 yards against a Florida State team that's defensive strength was in the front 4. And so that gave Oklahoma fans a ton of optimism about their running game heading into 2023. Both Barnes and Sawchuk have been banged up and haven't been 100%. They're working back from injury. They've only been used sporadically, so that's part of it. Right now, the 2 backs that they've leaned on most heavily to this point have been a walk-on in Tawi Walker, who is an absolute bowling ball of a human being.
5'9", about 215 of just thighs.
Yeah. I mean, he is pure muscle. He is pure muscle, and he's a fun guy to watch. Not very explosive, though. His strength is between the tackles. His strength is
like
coming downhill, getting you 4 or 5 yards at a time. The other back that they've leaned on is Marcus Major, who's a 5th-year senior and has never really made a productive dent. So I would say that on one hand, you have lack of top-shelf talent right now. Also, the offensive line has been somewhat inconsistent. And look, I'll be honest with you guys. I'm watching these games through a camera lens. So in the moment, the offensive line is one of those groups where I don't really get a great gauge on how they're playing. Generally have to go and rewatch and take it from there to figure out how they're actually performing. Sure. But there have been some inconsistencies. There's been some shuffling of personnel up front. So in some, it's a combination of a lot of things, and I think it'll be squared away eventually. I think the big question in a lot of OU fans' minds right now is, can you get it squared away before Texas? Because that's the one game, even more so than usual, that everybody has circled on their calendar.
So are those two running backs, are they still dinged up, or are they expected to play versus Iowa State?
So they have been active. They have just not been heavily utilized.
Okay.
So expect to see them in uniform, expect to see them in the backfield a little bit. I don't know how much they choose to lean on them, especially because Oklahoma, the way that they've game planned the last couple of games in particular against Tulsa and Cincinnati, like Jeff was talking about, they've just made it a point to throw it all over the yard. They haven't even really tried to establish the run up front. They've just said, okay, we're going to let Dylan Gabriel air it out, and if we need to run, we'll run. But our strength is in our wide receiver core right now, which that is the strength right now for Oklahoma offensively. So we're going to go let our big athletic wide receivers go make plays on the ball. And we got a quarterback that we trust to put it in the air 35, 40 times a game without turning it over.
So let's talk about Dylan Gabriel. So he transferred from UCF. He's the second year now starting for Oklahoma. Currently, he has the 8th highest odds to win the Heisman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, pretty impressive. And you touched on it too. You know, Oklahoma's known for their great receivers. So I would assume, without even seeing an Oklahoma game, that one, Gabriel is tearing it up, but two, they probably got some stud receivers and stud tight ends. So would you mind talking just a little bit on Gabriel's game? Is he more of, is he a runner at all? Does he just sit back in the pocket and pass it, or what can fans expect from him?
Yeah, he's not what I would quantify as a dual threat in the true sense of the word or the term, I suppose. He's a guy that can and will use his legs when necessary, but I'll give you an example. Going back to the Nebraska game last year, he had a 61-yard touchdown run, and that was one of those plays where everybody was just like, yo, where did that come from? That's, and I'm sitting there back at the end zone tracking it with my camera lens, like, he's going to run out of bounds, right? And he's going to run out of bounds, right? And I think there were a bunch of Nebraska defenders on the play that figured he was going to run out of bounds at some point, but he just kept running. So
to be fair,
play
who
like
didn't have
that,
a 61-yard run against Oklahoma or against Nebraska? To be fair,
yeah, okay, yeah, sure. But a play like that, the point is that's not really within the norm for Gabriel. He's a guy that, if he's got a 3rd and 6 and the play breaks down, he'll scramble, and he's quick enough that he can get to the marker and move the chains. But he has been a little bit more aggressive this year as opposed to last year and taking shots down the field, and he's got the wide receiver core to do it. Think about guys like Nick Anderson, 6'4", 205, Andrell Anthony, 6'2", 190. Jaden Gibson is 6'5", 195. So he's got a collection of really athletic receivers that not only can go make plays on 50-50 balls, but can also stretch the field with speed. Andrell Anthony's a sub 4.4 guy. And so I think for Gabriel, what he has in 2023 that he lacked in 2022 is he's got sizable receivers that he trusts to go make plays, and he's been a little bit more aggressive in getting the ball out and maybe trying to fit the ball into tighter windows that he wouldn't have tried to fit them into a year ago. His nature as a quarterback is that he plays pretty conservative. The game plan that Jeff Lebby, the offensive coordinator, has traditionally implemented for Gabriel has been one that's conducive to that and has minimized the risk. But you have kind of seen the playbook open up a little bit more for Oklahoma through the first 4 games of the 2023 campaign, and it's really given these wideouts an opportunity to shine, and they've done so. Nick Anderson's a perfect example. He was sidelined for much of his true freshman season in 2022, only appeared in 2 games, but a guy that had and has all the talent in the world to be a Biletnikoff-type guy down the road. Against Tulsa,
his brother is Robbie Anderson or Robbie Chosen.
Rodney.
I don't know if
What's that now?
His brother is NFL wide receiver Robbie. Isn't it Robbie Anderson or Robbie Chosen?
No. So he's got 2 brothers.
Okay.
Both of them had a cup of coffee in the NFL.
Oh, okay.
Ryder
I thought it was
Anderson,
Robbie
who played
Anderson's
defensive end.
My bad.
And then Rodney Anderson, who played running back at Oklahoma, and then later had a brief tenure with the Bengals. But Anderson, against Tulsa, he had 3 catches, totaled 120 yards, and all 3 of them went for touchdowns. Nice. So he's a big play machine when he gets the ball in his hands.
So Oklahoma, typically usually you guys have some stud tight ends too. Obviously Mark Andrews, Blake Bell, didn't he go to Oklahoma as well too?
Yeah.
You guys had a guy, Stogner, that went to South Carolina. I was like, I'm going to come back. I was like,
back,
just kidding. I'm going back.
Yep.
So do you guys have, I mean, what's Oklahoma's tight end room looking like?
Yeah, so if there is a vulnerability offensively for Oklahoma in terms of personnel, it is the tight end, because behind Austin Stogner, they don't got a whole heck of a lot. Caden Helms, who was expected to have a much larger role in the offense as a redshirt freshman, got sidelined prior to the season with a knee injury, so he's unavailable. And right now you're looking at a tight end room that basically consists of Stogner, a walk-on in Josh Fanuel, and a walk-on transfer from Texas A&M in Blake Smith, who only had 2 career catches when he made the transition from College Station to Norman. So not a ton of depth. They had an exciting true freshman in Cade McIntyre that broke his hand in week 1, and he's been sidelined. So Stogner hasn't been a huge part of the game plan, and my impression is that that's been largely by design, because they're afraid of, but quite simply, they don't want him to get hurt, because if he gets hurt, there's really nowhere to turn, at least nowhere that you're comfortable turning. And he offers more experience than anybody in that room by a country mile. So he's only got 3 receptions to this point, really hasn't been utilized in the passing game. I'd figure that starts to open up, especially against Texas. Austin Stogner, arguably his best game as a Sooner, came in the 2020 Red River rivalry matchup against Texas. So that's a guy that the Longhorn staff has learned to fear, but he really hasn't been a huge part of the game plan to this point, save for as a blocker. And so that's been another one of the enigmas of the Oklahoma offense. It makes a little bit more sense than what they're doing with the running back room right now. But a lot of fans are just waiting for Austin Stogner to get more involved and wondering when his breakout comes, because when he's been healthy, he's been one of the better tight ends in college football.
All right. Last question, most important question. What do you got in the kicking game here?
Let's get down to the meat and potatoes
This
here
is
now.
Kicking game.
This is you got a kicker and a guy who cut his teeth in special teams.
You guys still have, is it Gabe Burkich? However you say his name?
Burkich, after the 2021 season, decided to make the jump to the NFL, which did not pan out for him. He has not caught on anywhere.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've not heard his name at all. And he was an absolute stud in college. He had no vowel, like no vowels in his last name.
Yeah, so he
BRKCK.
Something like that.
He really struggled down the stretch in 2021. He didn't have a great pro day, and so yeah, he's one of those guys that left Norman and really was never heard from again.
And he left early.
Ooh,
he left early. He had 2 years left. He could still be kicking this year.
That's a miss. Ooh, boy.
Oh, God.
Are you going to get drafted? Like, there's
Come on,
3 kickers
man.
drafted in like 5 years?
Yeah, no, he was never going to get drafted. He wasn't.
Boy.
Come on,
But
man.
that aside, their kicker is a guy who's entering his second year. Well, I guess not entering anymore. We're 4 weeks into the season. He's in his second year as the starting place kicker. Zach Schmidt, local guy from Oklahoma City. Not nearly as big of a leg as Burkich. He's reasonably accurate. He only went 12 for 18 a season ago. A lot of those were real close misses, and he was asked to bomb a couple that he ended up hitting short. So he's by no means an elite college kicker, but he gets the job done. The punting game has really been an area of weakness for Oklahoma to this point, though. And that was really, really made apparent in that game against Cincinnati, because a year ago, Oklahoma had Michael Turk, who was objectively, by any measure, one of the top 2 or 3 punters in the country. And the hang time, the range that dude had on his kicks, I've never seen anything like it. He had the biggest leg of any punter I've ever seen.
Just wait.
Oklahoma, the thing is, Oklahoma fans' beef with that guy was that sometimes he would kick the ball too far, i.e. they'd want him to pin the opponent inside the 5, and it ended up there were a lot of touchbacks last year, which kind of rubbed some fans the wrong way. But conversely, this year he's graduated, he's off to the NFL, and the replacement, Josh Plaster, has been pretty inconsistent in that regard to this point, and doesn't get nearly the same hang time, same distance. Oklahoma lost the field position battle for probably 45 out of the 60 minutes against Cincinnati, and a lot of that was due to the fact that they just don't really have somebody that can push the ball downfield in the punting game. So definitely not a situation, I think, where Oklahoma wants to get into a battle of field position with any opponent. that's only happening, obviously, if the offense's wheels aren't turning properly. But if it does turn into a field position battle, I'll be honest with you, that's probably an area in which Oklahoma is going to be at a disadvantage.
And I'll tell you what, Iowa State might have the Ray Guy Award winner sitting on their sidelines this year too.
Okay.
Not joking. Tyler Perkins, he is having an
I
All-American.
think he's averaging 54, 53, 54.
Over 50
That'll
years.
do. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Talking about nothing but kicking it on Kicking It.
Yeah. Well, Parker, we appreciate your time. I know you got to get going here. Thank you so much for the time and talking Iowa State and Oklahoma, and hopefully we have a good one. Obviously, you'd probably like to see Oklahoma win. We'd like to see Iowa State win. Just want to see a good ball game on Saturday, though. But yeah, thank you again for your time. We appreciate it.
Always a good one when these two teams square off on a Saturday afternoon in the fall, fellas. Appreciate your time, and we'll certainly meet up again in the future.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Man, that was good. That was he's got like a solid broadcaster voice.
He does. And a lot of times when someone's got a broadcaster voice, they've got a broadcaster face. Handsome dude.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Thanks, Parker. I don't know.
thanks for your
It
time.
feels like so far in the season, like that was really good insight, but also in the same, like he was kind of do the same thing of like, well, I don't know yet. Like, is it good Oklahoma or is it bad everybody else? So I don't know. It's interesting to see how Saturday works. But yeah, that was fun. It's good.
What I kind of gathered was that Oklahoma, their offensive strengths line up well with Iowa State's offensive strengths. Our Iowa State's defensive backs, I would say, are the strong point of the defense.
True.
And Oklahoma's receivers are their strong points. Their running backs have been not quite as good, and Iowa State's
Linebackers
and really their front seven is young. I mean, they're inexperienced-ish, and their tight end, it hasn't really come through. So I think it's gonna be a great matchup. Iowa State's defensive backs versus Oklahoma's receivers. Oklahoma's got some big receivers too. It's gonna be fun to see how TJ Tampa 6'2" lines up against those 6'5", 6'4" guys.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We tried to get Adrian Peterson, but didn't work.
Yeah, he was busy.
All right, well, thanks everybody for coming in. That was the Goldfinch Athletics interview. We'll be back next week talking about whatever happens on Saturday, good or bad. Thanks for stopping in.
Take the clones to cover, though.